Broken and hooked to IVs, I watched her smile as she said she was taking everything. My name is Jonathan Pierce. I'm 48 years old, and until that moment, I thought I had built a life no one could take from me. I had a family, a respected business in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a reputation I had worked decades to protect. But lying there in that hospital bed, barely able to lift my head, I realized I was wrong. It all began the afternoon I collapsed in my office. One minute I was reviewing contracts. The next, my vision blurred, my chest tightened, and I dropped to the floor. My employees rushed in, panicked, and someone called 911. The last thing I remember was the sound of my assistant's voice as the paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher. When I woke up, I was surrounded by the sterile hum of hospital machines and the faint sting of oxygen in my nose. I felt weak, vulnerable, like a man stripped of all the armor he had carried through life. That's when she walked in. My wife, the woman I had trusted for 10 years. For a split second, I thought she was there out of love, maybe relief that I had survived. But her smile wasn't one of comfort. It was sharp, almost cruel, and the words that followed confirmed everything. "You're finished, Jonathan. I've already filed. I'm taking the kids, the house, and half your firm." Her voice was steady, rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for this moment. The nurse in the room froze, awkwardly adjusting a machine just to avoid looking at us. I wanted to shout, to argue, but my chest ached too much to waste the energy. Instead, I stayed silent. That silence rattled her more than any words could. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Don't try to fight me. You don't have the strength." I studied her face. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone who seemed to enjoy watching me broken. That was the first time I understood that this wasn't just about divorce. It was about humiliation. She wanted me destroyed. The irony was bitter. For years, I had built a reputation in Charlotte as a man who could weather any storm. Clients trusted me because I kept calm, even in crisis. And now, lying there in that hospital bed, barely able to lift my head, I realized I was wrong. A few hours later, as the medications dulled the pain and the machines hummed in rhythm, I thought back to the weeks before my collapse. There had been signs, phone calls she took in another room, unexplained trips, sudden coldness in her eyes. I had brushed them off, convincing myself it was stress or distance. But deep down, I had known. And knowing, I had prepared. What she didn't realize, as she smirked at my weakness, was that long before that hospital room, I had locked away documents she never wanted the world to see. Records that told a different story, one where she wasn't the victim, but the architect of betrayal. That night, as I drifted in and out of consciousness, I could hear her voice echoing in my head, each word cutting deeper than the last. Yet underneath the sting there was something else, a quiet strength building in me. She thought she had already won. She thought I was broken. But she didn't know that silence was my weapon. And I already knew she wouldn't be the only one standing against me.
The next morning, I woke to the sound of footsteps and the low murmur of voices in the hallway. My body still felt heavy, the medication dulling my senses, but my mind was sharp, too sharp, because I knew the calm wouldn't last. When the door opened, she wasn't alone. My wife walked in with a man I recognized instantly, her lawyer. His suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly straight, and his smile carried the smugness of someone who thought they'd already won. "Mr. Pierce," he said, placing a folder on the small rolling table by my bed, "I'm here to serve you. Consider this official notice. Divorce proceedings are in motion. Your wife will be seeking full custody of the children, possession of the house, and half of your firm." The words felt rehearsed, practiced, like a performance designed not just for me, but for anyone within earshot. I caught the way a nurse paused in the doorway, pretending to check her clipboard while listening closely. My wife didn't mind. She wanted witnesses. She wanted this humiliation to spread like wildfire. I didn't react, not a word. My silence seemed to annoy the lawyer, but it unsettled her more. She expected shouting, anger, maybe begging. Instead, she got nothing but a steady gaze. The lawyer cleared his throat. "I'd recommend you don't fight this, Jonathan. With your condition, well, the court won't look kindly on a man who can't even stand without help." I almost laughed, though my chest ached too much. They were already using my collapse against me. My body had betrayed me, and now they wanted to strip me of everything else. That's when another figure appeared in the doorway, a voice I hadn't heard in years. "John?" I turned my head, and there he was, my brother, Richard Pierce. Older by 3 years, but always the one chasing shadows, cutting corners, taking risks I never would. We hadn't spoken in over half a decade, not since a bitter fallout over money. For a moment, I thought maybe he had come to reconcile, to see me in my weakest hour and offer something like family. But then I saw the way his eyes flicked to her, the subtle nod they exchanged, and I understood. He wasn't here for me. He was here with her. "Rough time, little brother," Richard said, stepping inside, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "But maybe it's for the best. You've carried the weight too long. Let her handle things now. Let go." It was almost comical, the way he tried to dress betrayal as kindness. He sat in the chair beside my bed, leaning closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You don't have the fight left in you. Don't drag this out. Sign what you need to sign, and save yourself the embarrassment." I studied him, my own blood, speaking like an executioner. In his eyes, I saw greed, plain, unashamed. This wasn't about family. This was about opportunity. He was standing with her because he stood to gain from my fall. My wife placed a hand on his shoulder, like they had already become a team. "He'll see reason," she said, smirking, "soon enough." I wanted to close my eyes, to let the morphine take me away from their voices, but I forced myself to stay awake, to memorize every word, every look. Because silence wasn't just my weapon, it was my shield. They thought I was broken. They thought I was beaten. But they were wrong. What they didn't know was that every betrayal, every cruel word was being etched into me like fire on steel. And steel, once tempered, only grows stronger. As they left the room together, my wife, her lawyer, and my own brother, I lay there with the machines beeping steadily beside me. To them, I was just a man fading into irrelevance. But in truth, that was the moment I knew. The war wasn't just with her anymore. It was with him, too.
The room was quiet again after they left, but their words hung in the air like smoke. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the steady beep of the monitors, and for a moment I almost let the exhaustion pull me under. But then the door creaked open. It wasn't my wife, or her lawyer, or Richard. It was the nurse. She was older, maybe in her late 50s, with lines on her face that spoke of long nights and decades of caring for people in pain. Her badge read, Margaret. She didn't hover like the younger nurses, nervous and quick to leave the room. She set the chart at the end of my bed and studied me quietly, her eyes sharp, like she saw more than she was supposed to. "They don't come to help you, do they?" she said softly, almost to herself. I turned my head toward her, surprised. She didn't look away. "I've worked in this hospital 30 years, she continued, lowering her voice, "and I know the difference between family worried sick and family circling like vultures. I don't think you're imagining what I saw in their faces." Her words cut deeper than the lawyer's arrogance or my brother's betrayal,
because they were honest. She had seen it too, and for the first time since my collapse, I felt something other than pain and anger. I felt noticed. "You don't know the half of it," I whispered, my voice hoarse. She pulled the chair closer to my bed. "Then maybe you should tell someone who's willing to listen." I studied her. Margaret wasn't there for money or gain. She was just human. And sometimes that's exactly what you need. "Look in the bottom drawer of that cabinet," I said quietly, glancing toward the small wooden unit beside the bed, behind the spare gowns. She hesitated, then moved to the drawer, pulling it open. At first it looked ordinary, linens, supplies, but tucked beneath was a plain manila envelope. She froze, glancing at me. "You want me to—" "Just open it," I said. She slid the papers out and scanned the first page, her brow furrowed. Then her eyes widened. Inside were bank transfers, property records, even a signed affidavit, proof that my wife had manipulated accounts, hidden assets, and committed fraud under my name. Documents I had been gathering quietly for months, because deep down, I had sensed where this marriage was headed. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line as she flipped through the papers. "Good Lord," she muttered. "She doesn't just want to leave you, she wants to bury you. And I can't stalk her from this bed, not alone." She looked at me for a long moment, then back at the envelope. Finally, she tucked the papers neatly back inside. "You're smarter than they think, and luckier too, because they didn't notice you have someone watching now." Her words gave me something I hadn't felt since the collapse: hope. Quiet, fragile, but real. The door suddenly opened, and my wife swept in, Richard trailing behind her. Their conversation halted when they saw Margaret standing by my bed, holding the chart as if nothing had happened. "How's he doing?" my wife asked, her tone sugary but hollow. Margaret didn't flinch. "Stable, but weak. He needs rest." "Good, because he'll need his strength for what's coming," she smirked, glancing at Richard before leaving as abruptly as she had entered. When the door shut, Margaret leaned closer, her voice low. "She doesn't know what you've got here, and I think it's time you let me help you keep it safe." I nodded, my chest aching with every breath, but my mind sharper than ever. For the first time since my world began to collapse, I wasn't standing alone. And I knew then that the key to everything wasn't just in that envelope. It was in choosing the right moment to open it to the world. The days that followed felt like a slow tightening of a noose. Every morning they came. My wife, her lawyer, and my brother. They circled my hospital bed like predators circling prey, their words sweet on the surface, but poisoned underneath. "Jonathan," her lawyer would begin, voice smooth as silk, "the faster you cooperate, the easier this will be, for everyone." My wife would smile, tilting her head like she still had the right to play the part of a loving spouse. "Think of the kids," she'd whisper, as though ripping them away from me was somehow in their best interest. And Richard? He was the worst. My own brother leaned close one afternoon, his cologne sharp, his tone soft enough so only I could hear. "You can't fight this, not in your condition. Let her have what she wants, you'll still have your dignity." Dignity. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. He wanted me to surrender everything I had built, everything I had fought for, and call it dignity. Through it all, I said nothing. My silence became their frustration, and their frustration became my shield. Every word they spilled revealed more of themselves than I could have hoped, and Margaret, steady as ever, was always nearby, chart in hand, eyes sharp, catching every flicker of arrogance they didn't realize they showed. It was during one of those visits that the mask slipped. They thought I was dozing,
the medication pulling me under. Richard paced at the foot of the bed, while my wife stood near the window, whispering harshly to her lawyer. This was the plan from the start. Jonathan was just a step on the ladder. He was never supposed to last this long. Margaret stiffened at my side. Her hand paused mid-note on the chart. I kept my eyes half closed, my breathing even, but my heart pounded so loud I was sure they could hear it. The lawyer glanced nervously at her. "Lower your voice," he muttered, but she was already too far gone. "No, he needs to understand this isn't about love. It never was. It's about control, about what's mine now." Richard's eyes flicked toward her, uneasy, but he didn't stop her. Maybe he liked the sound of it. Maybe betrayal tasted sweet on his tongue. Finally, she caught herself, glancing at Margaret, who was pretending to jot something in the chart. My wife smoothed her hair, her mask sliding back into place. "We should go," she said briskly, ushering Richard and the lawyer out the door. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the steady beeping of the monitor beside me. I opened my eyes and found Margaret watching me, her expression grim. "You heard that, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "Every word," I said. She set the chart down, leaning closer. "Jonathan, this isn't just a divorce, it's a setup. She's been planning this for years." I swallowed hard, the taste of betrayal thick in my throat. "I know, and she thinks she's won already, but she doesn't know what I've kept from her." Margaret's eyes flicked toward the envelope she had locked away in her station. "When the time comes, you'll have more than just words to defend yourself." For the first time, a small ember of satisfaction burned in my chest. They thought they were tightening the noose. They didn't realize I was just waiting for them to pull it too tight, because that's when it snaps. When the doctors finally said I was stable enough to be discharged, my wife barely concealed her irritation. She had hoped I'd stay weak, tethered to machines, too fragile to think or fight back. Leaving the hospital meant I'd have space to breathe again, and that terrified her. But even as I packed what little I had, I kept my head down, playing the role they wanted to see, a man beaten, resigned, going through the motions. Margaret saw through it, of course. She'd spent her career reading people's eyes, and mine betrayed what my silence kept hidden. Before I left, she slipped into the room one last time. In her hands, she carried the manila envelope. "There's something in here you didn't tell me about," she said softly, placing it on my lap. I frowned, sliding the papers out. She had organized them neatly, paper-clipped by type. And in the middle, tucked between property records and signed statements, was something I hadn't expected. Receipts, wire transfers, and attached to them, emails. Emails between my wife and Richard. I felt my throat tighten as I read the subject lines. They weren't just conspiring recently, they had been working together for years. Richard had been leaking information about my business to her, helping her build leverage against me piece by piece. Margaret's eyes narrowed as she skimmed the pages over my shoulder. "Your brother's deeper in this than you thought." I let out a slow breath, my chest heavy. He's been feeding her everything. My deals, my weak points, even my health records. "Health records?" she asked, shocked. I nodded grimly. The collapse wasn't just bad luck. He knew about my heart condition. They timed this. Margaret pressed her lips together. "Then you can't just fight her. You'll have to take them both down." Her words rang true. My wife wanted my life. My brother wanted my name. And both of them thought I was too broken to stop it. That night, after I was released and returned home, alone, of course, I sat at my desk, staring at the envelope. Every page felt heavier than the last. Evidence, proof, weapons. But I didn't rush. I didn't call the police or storm into a lawyer's office. That wasn't my way. I had learned long ago that real power comes not from shouting, but from silence, from letting your enemy think they've already won. The next morning, Richard showed up at the house. He wore that same false concern, offering to help me transition control of the business. His words dripped with rehearsed sympathy, but his eyes betrayed greed. "John, you can't keep fighting this. You'll ruin yourself. Let us handle things. It'll be cleaner that way." I nodded slowly, feigning weakness. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's too much for me now." He smiled, satisfied, and left believing he'd convinced me. But as soon as the door closed, I pulled the envelope back into my hands. Because Margaret was right. It wasn't just about my wife anymore. Richard's fingerprints were all over this. And when the moment came, I wouldn't just clear my name. I'd drag both of theirs into the light. Margaret called me that evening, her voice firm but kind. "When the trial comes, you'll need more than paper. You'll need someone who saw it with her own eyes." I knew what she meant, and I knew she was right. "Would you testify?" I asked. There was a pause, then her answer came steady and sure. "For a man who refuses to be broken by betrayal? Yes, I will." For the first time since I collapsed on that office floor, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. They thought they were building a case to bury me, but I was building something too.
The courthouse in Charlotte felt colder than any hospital room. The walls weren't lined with machines, but the weight pressing down on me was heavier than any IV drip. People whispered as I entered, supported by a cane the doctors had insisted I use. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting them all see what they wanted to see. A man weakened, beaten, ready to give up. Across the aisle, my wife sat tall, polished to perfection, her lawyer whispering in her ear. She barely looked at me. Why would she? In her mind, this was already won. Richard was there too, dressed in a suit that looked borrowed, smugness radiating off him. He gave me a small nod, as if to say, "It's over, brother. Accept it." The judge called the session to order, and the lawyer wasted no time. He painted me as an absent husband, an unhealthy man unfit to raise children or manage a firm. Every word was a knife, but I didn't flinch. "Your Honor," the lawyer said smoothly, "my client seeks custody of the children, the marital home, and equitable distribution of assets, including half of Mr. Pierce's firm. Given his medical condition, we believe it is in everyone's best interest for him to agree." The judge glanced at me, expression neutral. "Mr. Pierce, do you have anything to say in response?" I cleared my throat, leaning slightly on the cane. "Not yet, Your Honor." The courtroom rustled with whispers. Not yet. My wife smirked, thinking I was stalling because I had nothing. Her lawyer pushed harder, presenting financial charts and affidavits, each blow designed to bury me further. But while he spoke, I let my eyes wander to the back of the room, where Margaret Hale sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. Hours dragged by. They brought witnesses who echoed their narrative. Richard even took the stand, pretending sorrow as he described my supposed decline, how I was no longer capable of leading, of being a father. I listened, stone-faced, memorizing every lie. Finally, her lawyer closed his binder with a triumphant snap. "Your Honor, this case is clear. Mr. Pierce is no longer the man he once was. My client seeks only what she is entitled to. He cannot fight this, and frankly, he shouldn't try." The judge turned to me again. "Mr. Pierce, this is your opportunity. Do you have anything further to present before I make my decision?" The silence stretched. Everyone leaned forward, waiting for me to crumble. My wife's smirk widened. Richard folded his arms, satisfied. I straightened slowly, feeling every eye on me. My voice was calm, deliberate. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." Gasps rippled through the courtroom as I turned, lifting a hand toward the back. Margaret stood, calm but steady, the manila envelope clutched firmly in her hands. My wife's smirk faltered for the first time. "This is Margaret Hale," I said, my voice carrying more strength than I'd felt in weeks. "She is a nurse at the hospital where I was admitted. She witnessed firsthand the conduct of my wife and my brother, and she has documents they never expected to see the light of day." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." But the judge raised a hand. "Bring her forward." Margaret walked with the calm of someone who had seen countless men broken and countless women arrogant. She handed the envelope to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. Papers shuffled. The judge's brow furrowed. "What is this?" he asked sharply. "Proof," Margaret said simply. "Proof that Mrs. Pierce and Richard Pierce conspired for years, falsified records, and openly admitted the marriage was a calculated scheme. I heard it myself, and these documents confirm it." My wife's face drained of color. Richard shifted in his seat, eyes darting wildly. For the first time in this entire ordeal, it wasn't me under the spotlight. It was them.
The judge's brow furrowed deeper with every page he turned. What had begun as routine proceedings now carried the weight of scandal. He set the papers down, fixing his gaze on my wife. "These signatures," he said sternly, "these transfers. Can you explain this, Mrs. Pierce?" Her face, once so composed, cracked under the weight of the question. She shifted in her seat, glancing desperately at her lawyer, who was already sweating. "Your Honor, this is fabricated. He's trying to smear me. Jonathan must have—" Margaret's voice cut through the air, calm but unyielding. "I heard you myself, in the hospital. You said the marriage was a plan from the start, that Jonathan was just a step on the ladder. I wrote it down the moment you left the room, and I'll swear to it under oath." The courtroom gasped. The judge banged his gavel for order. My wife's eyes flashed with rage as she realized the mask was gone, the performance shattered. Her lawyer scrambled. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this nurse is overstepping. The judge raised his hand sharply. "Sit down, counselor." His voice carried finality. All eyes turned back to me. For weeks, I had been silent, enduring humiliation, allowing them to think I was broken. Now, for the first time, I allowed my voice to carry the weight of truth. "There's more," I said quietly. Richard's head snapped toward me. "John, don't—" But it was too late. I signaled, and Margaret pulled out a second set of papers from the envelope. The bailiff carried them to the judge. As the pages turned, the courtroom fell into a hush so deep you could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. The judge looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Richard Pierce, care to explain why your name appears on these transfers? Why funds from your brother's firm ended up in your personal account, funneled through shell companies tied to Mrs. Pierce?" Richard paled. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He glanced at my wife, but she looked away, her face a mask of panic. The judge slammed the papers down. "This is fraud. This is conspiracy. I don't know what arrangement you two thought you could hide, but you've brought it right into my courtroom." Whispers erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. Even the court clerk looked stunned. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply met Richard's eyes. For years, he had chased shortcuts, dragged my name through arguments, claimed I was the lucky one, while he was the one overlooked. And now, in front of everyone, the truth was clear. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had tied himself to her downfall. "Jonathan, please," Richard stammered, his voice cracking. "You don't understand. She pushed me into this. I didn't want—" The judge silenced him with a glare. Save it for the investigators. My wife's lawyer buried his face in his hands. She sat frozen, her perfect posture collapsing under the weight of reality. For years, she had orchestrated this moment, believing she could take everything, and in minutes, it unraveled. The judge turned back to me. "Mr. Pierce, the court will take these documents and testimonies under full consideration. In light of this evidence, I am suspending all claims by Mrs. Pierce until further review. Custody and assets remain with you until the investigation concludes." The words struck like thunder. My chest tightened, not from weakness this time, but from something I hadn't felt in weeks. Relief. I closed my eyes briefly, hearing the murmurs, the scratching pens, the gavel echoing through the chamber. When I opened them again, I looked at my wife, then at Richard. Neither could meet my gaze.
The gavel echoed one last time, sealing the judge's decision. For a moment, the courtroom was suspended in silence, as though the very air was holding its breath. Then the whispers began again, reporters scribbling, strangers murmuring, the sound of lives shifting forever. I didn't look at the papers the judge set aside for investigation. I didn't need to. I had known the truth all along. What mattered was that now, finally, everyone else did too. I rose slowly from my chair, leaning on the cane the doctors had given me. Every movement was deliberate. Weak on the outside, yes, but inside I carried a strength my wife and brother had never understood. The kind that doesn't shout, the kind that doesn't beg, the kind that waits. Across the aisle she sat, pale and frozen, her hands clutching her lawyer's sleeve like a lifeline. The confidence she wore like a crown had vanished, leaving behind nothing but fear. For years she had played the role of devoted wife, all while weaving threads of betrayal. Now the mask was shattered, and the whole room had seen the face beneath. Richard slumped beside her, sweat beading on his forehead, his tie askew. My brother, the man who once shared my childhood, my home, my name. He had chosen greed over blood, and in the end, he'd gambled everything on her. Now they both stared into the same abyss. The judge dismissed the room. People rose, chairs scraped against the floor. But I stood still for a moment, breathing it all in. I wanted to remember this, the silence after the storm. Not as a victory parade, but as proof that patience and truth outlast even the cruelest betrayal. Margaret approached me quietly, her presence steady as it had been from the start. She placed a hand on my arm. "It's over, Jonathan," she said softly. I nodded, at least this part of it. She gave me a small smile. "You stood taller than they ever expected." I didn't answer. Words weren't necessary. Her loyalty had been the bridge between despair and justice, and no thank you could ever capture that. But I hoped she saw it in my eyes. As I stepped into the hallway, flashes from reporters' cameras lit up the corridor. Questions flew at me like arrows. "Mr. Pierce, how do you feel? Will you press charges? What happens to your firm now?" I said nothing, just walked forward, each step a quiet declaration that I didn't owe anyone an explanation. The truth had already spoken for me. Outside, the late afternoon sun poured over Charlotte, warm and golden. I paused at the top of the courthouse steps, the city sprawling out before me. For weeks I had been confined to hospital walls, chained to betrayal, suffocated by silence. Now that same silence felt like freedom. I thought of my children. They hadn't been in that room, thank God. One day they'd know what happened, that their father hadn't raised his voice or lowered his dignity, even when the world tried to strip him bare. They'd know that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the steady calm that refuses to break. I descended the steps slowly, cane tapping against the stone. Behind me, the courthouse buzzed with chaos. Reporters chasing the next headline, lawyers scrambling, my wife and brother drowning in the weight of their own schemes. But I didn't look back. The war they thought they won had ended before it even began. Because the moment they mistook silence for weakness, they lost. And as I walked away, I realized something else. They had tried to bury me in the quiet, but in the quiet, I had learned how to rise.